We're good to go.
Great.
Well, Andrew, I think we're live on the internet.
Oh, that's so great. So great to be here, Jennifer.
Hello, everybody. My name is Jennifer West. I am the artistic director of Muse West Concerts, and I would like to first of all acknowledge that the land on which I am situated today is the ancestral, traditional, and unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, including the territories of Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh. I am grateful for their stewardship of this small corner of Turtle Island. My guest today is composer Andrew Balfour. Andrew, would you like to tell us where you're located today?
I'm in Toronto right now, but I'm originally from Treaty 1 territory, from the Ojibwe, Cree, Dene, Métis, and Inuit. I'm originally from Manitoba, but now I'm just living in Toronto, where the work is. But I'm thankful to be here for everybody, hopefully across the country.
Yes, and we know we have a lot of people listening across Canada today, and we just want to encourage everyone to think about where they are today and the land that they are on. I'm actually originally from Red Deer, which is right in between Treaty 6 and Treaty 7 territory. Right in the middle. I'm going to introduce our guest, and we're going to get right into conversation. Before we start, Andrew is an innovative composer, conductor, singer, and sound designer with a large body of choral, instrumental, electroacoustic, and orchestral works. Andrew Balfour has been commissioned by the Winnipeg, Regina, and Toronto Symphony Orchestras, Ensemble Caprice, Groundswell, the Winnipeg Jazz Orchestra, the Winnipeg Singers, Kingston Chamber Choir, and Camerata Nova, among many others. His works have been performed and or broadcast locally, nationally, and internationally, and they are fantastic. Please go listen to his music. It's an honor to welcome Andrew here today. How are you doing? Happy Friday.
Tansi, Ani, hello. Thank you very much. I'm good. I think it seems to be turning into spring out east here, so that's kind of a relief. So it feels good to sort of get hopefully by this winter, touch wood, and enjoy some of this beautiful weather. It's been a long year. I know all of us have been going through a lot.
I sometimes feel like I'm still in December 2019 and I'm going to wake up.
Yeah, that would be nice.
But my little calendar on the top of my computer is telling me that's not quite how time is managed.
Yeah, that's true.
Now, I was reading in preparation for our chat today. Are you working with A Roomful of Teeth in New York as well?
I have a couple of years ago, I wrote a piece for them as part of the Winnipeg Winnipeg Symphony's New Music Festival, and that was a thrill and a half. Let me tell you, like that was just to be able to. We had actually worked with Carolyn Shaw a couple of years before. We did her highly remarkable partita for the same festival, and so she came in and worked with us. So that was pretty special. But to be able to write for that group, for the whole group was a big thrill. I was very lucky.
Oh, that's wonderful. She's a fantastic composer, and that group does some wonderful work. Yes. And you mentioned at the beginning that you are originally from Winnipeg, and that's where Camerata Nova is. So can you tell us a bit more about Camerata Nova?
Well, it's such an important part of not only my music career, but also my life. They're family to me, and we're heading to 25 years. Which is remarkable when you really think about it, considering we started off as 5 singers that met once a week, got a bottle of wine and sang madrigals, just for the joy of it. And, next thing you know, after a couple of years, we decided to do a concert. And they always say in the music business, it's all fun and games until you start doing concerts. So we really kind of we decided, we started out small, but we loved early music. And that's kind of the reason we started out. A lot of us had finished university, but we still wanted to sing. So it kind of grew out of that, but it's grown into so much. I'm so proud of the organization. We have an incredible board of directors. We have gotten very diverse in our programming in terms of contemporary music, Indigenous themed infused music, collaborations with wonderful Indigenous artists, but also keeping to our early music roots by doing major early music, like such as the Monteverdi Vespers, the Pretorius Christmas Mass, bringing in early music instruments from out east. We've been very lucky. We've been able to work with Roy Goodman, the late Christopher Jackson. Next year, we're going to work with David Follis from Toronto, the founder of the Toronto Consort. So we're very lucky that way.
Cool.
But we've done a lot in 25 years, but we hope to keep on going. It's even with this crazy past year, we're still pretty busy online. So, but we really want to get back to singing,
Have you done
together.
online rehearsals where certain groups have to mute and certain people sing and then, or they just listen to their own part and sing and hope we all end up at the same double bar line?
No, thankfully, because I've been in part of those rehearsals. That's very difficult to do, but you have to do what you have to do. We've kind of looked at times, especially when the numbers were down in Manitoba, and it was safe to sort of be at a distance to be able to take a small group of singers and then rehearse. We have professional singers, so they're pretty much eager to get some type of work and get their music together and then come into the studio and then record in small groups and leave, sanitize, and have another the other small group come in. It's not the ideal way to do it, and I understand every choral conductor in the world essentially is going through the same types of problems, trying to figure out how to keep on singing and give music to people. But it's hopefully I'm an optimist. I'd like to think that we can get through this, and perhaps in the next year we can really have full choral concerts and orchestral concerts and what have you.
I agree, and I think we have managed at Muse West Concerts to have one piano trio performance, and it was fantastic. And I have managed since March of 2020. I went to one ensemble concert that was a Vancouver Chamber Choir. They did German Baroque Lutheran sacred music, and it was the first time I'd heard a choir in 7 months, and it was a pretty powerful experience. There were only 40 of us there. If you brought a friend, you couldn't even sit beside a friend. You had to sit, like, there were really separate seats.
Yeah.
I think what I really miss hearing a choir.
Yeah. It is when this all went down, a little over a year ago. I don't think any of us realized at the time that if you said, okay, well, there's not going to be any singing for the next foreseeable future, nothing, not in churches, not in halls, nothing. We wouldn't have believed it. It's a reality right now, and it's still, and in a lot of ways, I know that it's tough on so many levels, from community choirs to church choirs to professional ensembles to teaching singing. It's and it's because it's a global like pandemic, and it affects every chorister in the world. It's just kind of mind blowing. It's crazy, but I also sort of think that we found ways to still communicate through singing online, and with innovative ways to do it. I think that's kind of unique as well, and I think that's probably here to stay. But we certainly want to get back to singing together in the same room or hall, and to feel those vibrations, because you can't, you when you're in a room full of singing, you feel the vibrations. The molecules are changing, our bodies have changed. So that's something I'm really looking forward to. I know everybody else is as well.
Yeah, I think so. That's very true. We're going to take a trip back to Winnipeg again. I'm also from the prairies, so this is just two prairie people having a chat. So I know that you've been involved in some educational projects in Winnipeg's inner city schools, and you visited some remote Indigenous communities in Manitoba to share some music with the young Indigenous students there. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Well, that started earlier on. At first in Winnipeg, through the Winnipeg Symphony Orchestra's outreach program, and I was lucky enough to be hired to go into inner city schools in Winnipeg to work with kids. And Winnipeg has the second largest Indigenous urban population in the country, and it's quite apparent in downtown Winnipeg. And it's there's a lot of social issues, of course, and a lot of these schools in inner city really don't have the resources to have full-time music. So I mean, that's just a reality, and across the board, though, too. Music is just being taken away. Arts have been taken away. So I personally feel that I was happy to be involved, and I love working with kids. And but it grew into sort of being part of the Music Alive program for the National Arts Center, and that was sort of based towards northern isolated communities, vulnerable communities,
Mm.
that they identified. So I've been with Music Alive now, I guess, for almost 12 years. They pair you off with another teaching partner, and you go up and do, all these communities. I've been to Cross Lake, Norway House, Grand Rapids, you name it, all over the place in northern Manitoba. And these are schools and communities that are in dire need of that type of empowerment, because that's our, to empower. I don't go up to teach kids music. I don't go up to teach them about Mozart or
Mm-mm.
music theory. I want them to create something on their own, and that's sort of our job, is to sort of empower them through, whether it's a little mini opera, or whether it's a play, or whether it's movement. We've been, even successful with Murray Schafer's music, with his animated scores, and having kids write their own graphic scores, and get them to come up with ideas of, what does this mean? Does that mean a movement? Is this a sound? Things like that. And it's also connecting with the community. So I think there are two Canadas. There is a Southern Canadian with clean water and high-speed internet and electricity, and then there's the Northern Canada with almost none of those. And that's the division that our country has always faced and is facing now, even made much worse with the pandemic, because they don't have the infrastructure to be able to handle anything like this. Although Indigenous people have been dealing with these issues, diseases and viruses for a long time. Thus the sort of disbelief or skepticism about vaccines or what have you. So it's a complicated issue, and it's tough. And it's tough not doing it this year. That's the other thing I was mentioning to say, is that, I had a whole bunch last winter, March, April, and May, lined up, and then they all got, of course, canceled because of the lockdowns and the pandemic. So that was, and still remains, I think, out of everything that I've lost or concert canceled, being, postponed, canceled, lost commissions, not singing, what have you. The thing that hurts the most is not being able to have done that, and feeling I'm not sure when we can do that for the next little while, because those are our vulnerable ones, are these students who have so much potential, but it's tough.
And it's important that people not travel to those remote regions right now, because heaven forbid anybody in those communities gets sick. Like, they don't have the ICU beds.
No.
They can't intubate, or have ventilators. And it's just, that's why, I read an article that some people went on a recreational trip to Haida Gwaii, and I was like, why did you do that?
Yeah.
Wait, there will be a time and you will enjoy it even more.
Yeah. Yeah, that it is, like, again, it's just unfortunate that's it's tough. We're a huge country, and so many of these communities are so isolated beyond whatever we can imagine. Just, especially when you go north, you realize it's really crazy how isolated a lot of these communities are. So and it's so expensive to airlift somebody out or fly them out, and
Absolutely.
so yeah, it's crazy.
And we're going to get back to talking about clean water later on, because I know this is something you're passionate about based on previous conversation I heard with you, and I do want to talk about that. And it sounds like you've gone to a variety of remote communities, and that you've learned a lot about Indigenous music. And I'm imagining that there's a huge diversity of Indigenous music traditions here on Turtle Island, and that it's not just one tradition. Tell us about, like, how diverse is the musical tradition here with the Indigenous communities?
Oh, well, that's probably a huge ocean unto itself. The idea of the variety, the diversity, I would even say much, like, in terms of, like, languages. First of all, languages in itself, the nations of Turtle Island are plentiful and very diverse. Much more diverse probably than I would even say Europe, in terms of the individual cultures. And Turtle Island's a pretty large island, of course, so there's so many hundreds, thousands of different nations. Many have long gone since, settlers and contacts. So, but yet we're still here and so many of our nations are still here. I think that musically speaking, that I can't really speak for in terms of traditional. I don't, I was a 60s scooper. I was taken away from my blood at 6 months old and then brought into placed into a white family, but I was lucky because that family was loving and very musical. I wouldn't be here today without being in that family.
Mm.
So I grew up, I'm colonized in some ways. I grew up as an Anglican choir boy, learned how to read music, went to England several times, learned all that English cathedral repertoire, which I still love. And that gave me, I got a break, which many of my brothers and sisters didn't. They just foster home to foster home. So I can't really speak in terms of like traditional Indigenous music, but I can speak sort of like my experiences. Like I don't write in Indigenous music. I write music that has like storytelling about. I don't really speak the language that well, but I can tell you that what I think is exciting about Indigenous the scene right now is that it's incredible, the voices that are coming up, and we always sort of like look at the Tribe Called Red or Tanya Tagaq or Jeremy Dutcher, and these are great, fantastic names, but there's so many, such a wide variety just in Canada itself. And just whether it's hip hop or whether it's dance or classical. There's a lot of when I started out composing years ago, 25 years ago, there was not many that I knew of. Mind you, I was isolated in Winnipeg, but there were not that many. But it's so encouraging to see that not only there are more Indigenous composers and artists and creators out there, but they're also getting work and they're collaborating. So that's encouraging. We still have a long way to go. But the diversity in Indigenous music right now in this country is pretty amazing. I'll like every time I hear, an up and coming artist or what have you, it's like it gives you hope.
And like you said, and this really resonated with me, is that this music is supposed to empower people. And I think something that a lot of Western arts organizations, whether it's theater, music, or visual art, what we struggle with is we want to visit remote communities. We want to serve communities that have needs, but we don't want to come with this like golden plate and say, oh, we present to you Mozart, this will make
Mm-hmm.
your life better.
Yeah.
It's just so patronizing, and it's taken a lot of time and reflection. And I think the way that you described it as just empowering people on
Mm-hmm.
their own,
Yeah.
that's amazing. Now for our listeners out there, I teach grade 5, and so I and have some background in Canadian history, so I know what 60 scoop is. Can you please tell our listeners what that is? This is really important for them to hear.
Oh well, it's kind of a crazy legacy, and it's within my lifetime, most of our lifetimes, in terms of specifically in 1967 when the Dominion of Canada was turning 100 years old. The government of Canada wanted to sort of celebrate that by essentially taking Indigenous children away from their blood. But that was happening years before. Of course, it was the residential school systems. I'm sure there were many people within the system, within the government, that thought it was a good idea, in terms of like if they thought maybe perhaps like some children were actually not getting the opportunities that they could have. Back in that, the government was very clear that even Trudeau, even the Trudeau Senior, Pierre Trudeau, and Jean Chrétien, who was at that time was Indian Affairs Minister, wanted to do away with the Indian Act. They didn't want any labels. They wanted everybody to be Canadians. That was that was that type of time where the government thought that way, in terms of like, well, let's just place them in families where they're going to get a better shot in life. So I'm like I said, I'm extremely lucky, and I love my family. My mother and father passed away, but I love them dearly, of what they were able to do for me and to support me for music. But I also come across people, the older I get, that went from foster home to foster home. Like I always say, I'm not a residential school survivor, but I didn't go through I did, in terms of as a young child. It was tough to, I didn't know anything about growing up in the 70s, anything about my blood or culture. And back then, I would have been ashamed to identify as an Indigenous Native person. So, it's a process. I've gone through a process all my life, and maybe that's when I write music or when I explore ideas, that's sort of my way of exploring my culture or exploring my spirit. or through the guidance of my ancestors. So I'm lucky. I'm here because I had a lot of support and love. So I just feel that the idea of taking any child away from their blood is tragic, I think. And there was thousands of them at the late 60s. So.
And when I first read about this, I knew about residential schools. I've known about that for a fairly young age, at least early junior high, early teenage years. But this event of 60 Scoop, I just thought to myself, like, wow, this was really the federal government of my country
Mm-hmm.
doing this. And that was quite appalling to me. And so, I have prepared so many questions for this interview, but something that just came to my mind, I have to ask, because you've mentioned that you've studied the English choral tradition.
Mm-hmm.
And in the history of these residential schools, churches were perpetrators of such violence.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to ask, how has it been studying this liturgical, like, how do you reconcile this liturgical music with some of what the church has done? I'm curious about that.
Well, that's a good question. I'm very detached, from the so-called church. Like I wouldn't call myself Christian. And but that's an ongoing conversation in terms of, like, I personally love the music, and not just the English church, but Renaissance music in general. And that goes to Catholic Church too. And there's a lot I have to say about Catholic, but I'm not going to right now. But I certainly feel that there's a certain amount of ritual, and it's like the smell of incense.
Mm-hmm.
If you just love the smell of incense, and you just like, but if you learned it from a church, you went to church and you loved incense, and you love the smell of it, that doesn't make you stop you from still loving the smell of incense, or even using it in some kind of ceremonial way outside of the church.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, a lot of particularly in the early music scene, the high Renaissance music that we hear right now are sung by professional choirs that it's not in a liturgical context. Some might say that actually takes away some, in terms of the actual magic of the mass or whatever they believe in. But I think that that music, at least professionally, has been secularized in terms of it becomes concert or commercialized by recordings. And
Mm-hmm.
I love the sound, and I love this particular a cappella singing. It is a highly refined music because it does take and I think sometimes when I used to conduct camerata in this repertoire, I was like, I don't really, if you don't believe it, that's fine. But you're actors. You have to sort of, if you're singing the mass, if you're singing Kyrie eleison, you have to sort of, that's the emotion involved in it. And I think I've just the last 2 days, I've been actually transcribing a couple of Renaissance motets into Ojibwe, the text.
So cool.
And I'm not translating because I'm not using it. It's, I'm just using it, Ojibwe honor songs that have nothing to do with the actual text, but I want to set it to the music. So it's been a fascinating exercise for me because I wanted to do this for some time. I'm curating a concert out west, actually. That's why I'm doing this right now. So it's like, your question is excellent because I feel that it can be shaky in terms of, like, I don't identify with the church or the actual meanings of the text for music that I love. I'm not a Lutheran, but I sure Bach is my God. Just to sort of like just what he's able to do, and he's always been something that's a higher level for everything for me. It's remarkable. I went on a bit of a Bach kick just a couple of weeks ago, and it just like refreshed my soul.
Oh yes. Well, and it's passion season. Everybody's putting their virtual passions online now.
Yeah.
So we're gonna kind of swing back to talking about history of residential schools. And regular listeners to our podcast, you've arrived at a very serious, kind of a serious episode. So buckle up. This won't be Beethoven string quartets, and that is okay.
Well, we could talk about that too if you want.
We can. They're great too. And I came across one of your pieces called Take the Indian. I watched the full performance. It's very moving. And I'm wondering if you could tell our audience more about writing that piece.
Mhm.
It must have been difficult to write. Um, and I noticed like the trickster has quite the role.
Mhm. Yeah, that piece started out as when the Truth and Reconciliation Commission came into Winnipeg for the testimonies at the Forks, um, back in 2012, I think it was. And I went down to the Forks, and there were about, I think, maybe 6, 7 Kupum's grandmothers that were seated in the middle in the healing circle, and there was a large audience, maybe 400 people in the auditorium.
Mm.
And they talked for a good 3.5, 4 hours. And it's one of these things where you can hear a pin drop, but it's such a cliche. But it was like the energy in that room was both tragic and just the empathy, the sadness that we were all witnessing, to these probably women in their 60s and 70s, that had gone through some pretty horrible things, and to witness that was both, I don't know, that I think I've certainly went through every emotion you could possibly imagine: rage, shame, hating Canada, hating, the church.
Yep.
It was just like all the things that come to you, especially when you realize these are women in their 60s or 70s. They're talking about when they were young, when they're kids, when they're just like, so much hope. This is a time when children need to be nurtured and need to be, to beat people, to abuse them, to take away their language and medicines, just seems to me is about a pretty inhumane act to do continuously.
Mm.
But anyways, so I, at the same time, the Winnipeg Symphony commissioned me to write a piece for the New Music Festival in alliance, in concordance with the opening of the Canadian Museum of Human Rights in Winnipeg. So I decided, well, that's what I wanted to write about, but I didn't know how I was going to approach it. I decided that what I wanted to do is to take that testimony anonymously. I didn't, I wanted to take snippets of what I heard, and which so many other people have, heard too. So essentially, there's a dialogue in Take the Indian, which is sort of the government of Canada, the church, the survivors of the residential school, and the children of survivors. So there's many layers to it. And I also use a lot of, going back to church music, I use a lot of church motifs in there. And we decided to go all out on this in terms of we were going to actually stage it. So I ended up deciding I was going to do the performing arts, do the victim on stage with a broken drum being yelled at by the men's chorus, who are all dressed in black cassocks, who represent both the church and the state. And the sopranos and altos are dressed in white, to sort of to be the survivors of the residential school, and sort of children. So it was pretty powerful. We were lucky to have some good direction, and Mel Braun conducted this. We brought in the principal cellist from Winnipeg Symphony, Yuri Hooker, to play the cello part, and we got in a wonderful dancer named Ian Nikita to play the trickster spirit, and we had Corey Campbell, my wonderful friend, who's a Ojibwe keeper from Sagin First Nations, Manitoba, that led us consultation, but also sang as part of this as well. It was hard to write, but it was even harder to perform.
Oh,
and I've done it several times. I've done it a couple times in Winnipeg, and I did it in Toronto a couple times with some choirs. And so it's very difficult. Again, you almost like you unleash, the spirit of the ancestors or the people that are not here with us anymore because of that, a painful life. But I also feel that it's an important message. Like it's and I always say it's not really for Indigenous people. We already know this story. It's for non-Indigenous people to sort of witness, even though it might be harsh and sad, but it's only as a fraction of what the reality was. So I also try to protect myself when I do that by smudging, making sure that I have medicines. When I first did it, I was depressed for almost a couple of months.
I'm sure.
I identified, because an elder said, well, you didn't protect yourself. So that was a good lesson. But I'm not really, I'm also kind of an optimistic person, so I don't I also try to celebrate life. But these are important issues that I'm not an activist or a politician or a lawyer, or doctor, but I certainly feel like I can tell a story. I want to tell a story through my music.
And Andrew, that is so, first of all, thank you. Thank you for using your voice to tell those important stories that have happened here on Turtle Island. Um, and as I reflect on what you've just said, I was going to ask how you take care of yourself during that process. And I wanted to ask, how do you stay optimistic for these communities in Canada that, well, they're being neglected, like you said,
Mhm.
like running water, basic internet, basic
Mhm.
infrastructure, like we're not even talking gravel roads here.
Yeah.
So how do you keep optimistic about this situation? Because I find when I'm teaching this to my students in grade 5, because grade 5 is in BC is kind of the time when we really dig into some historical information about the residential schools.
Mhm.
And sometimes a few of the kids come up to me and say, am I supposed to feel sad about this for a long time? And I say, well, if you're feeling sad right now, I want to acknowledge that that's normal.
Mhm.
But you do seem to have an optimistic outlook. Tell me, how do you, like, is it the spirit of ancestors who like came before with amazing accomplishments? How do you keep hopeful?
I think there's a sense of resiliency in Indigenous people,
Mm,
including myself. I've also been through a long and sometimes difficult path in life. It certainly has been very difficult in many instances where I was pretty bleak and not optimistic.
mm,
And yet here I am. So I think lately, even in the midst of a global pandemic, I still feel very grateful for a lot of things. I've met a wonderful partner, the last couple of years. I'm very happy to be in this place in my life where I feel that I still have great ideas I really want to explore. I also feel that, yeah, I mean, I think this has been a tough year, especially I'm a news junkie, so it's hard to stay optimistic when you're just kind of like reading the page online, especially this last year. Man, what a doozy this year's been. Like it's hard not to be angry.
yeah,
But in some ways, that's not really, especially when it comes to news, it's not real reality in a lot of ways. Reality is still the people that that I can think of that don't have clean drinking water, and the suicide rates, amongst young people. So I think that governments are the last institutions that are going to be able to change that. They only have 4-year mandates. Their interests are much higher than it's oil and big business. If that's the important thing for governments, and it's always been that way.
yeah,
Um, and I feel that really we as a community of artists can shine light on this, but really it's going to take an effort to education that's so important, because I think that we still have, like I said, a long way to go before we can actually, everybody can be the same resources. There's no reason that people should not clean drinking water or food issues up north, where it's just like, food sovereignty is what they call it. It's so
yes.
important to, but I feel that, I feel optimistic because I think that I'm very fortunate, but it doesn't stop me from sometimes crying when I hear an injustice, or being very upset when I sort of see that, why I can't believe those people are treated that way, or being optimistic doesn't mean I don't have the emotions of being angry and also just sort of sometimes despondent.
Hmm.
But again, I'm lucky because I do have, like I said, a loving partner, and also just a family, and my family of Camerata and my music. So I'm very fortunate that way.
Well, and I think that the key word of resilience is
Mm.
something that we do see. And I just feel like by this time that um, if I were an Indigenous person, I would be exhausted.
Mm.
I would be tired of being resilient, and I would want someone to hold me up. And um, yeah, I think that at least in BC, education is kind of going in the right direction. But yes, music and visual art and dance and theater are wonderful ways that we can shine light on these. And like you mentioned, this is still happening in Canada. We recently have incidents in Quebec of a patient who's Indigenous
Mm.
dying because they were being ignored.
Yeah.
And not only ignored, but racial slurs hurled at this poor person,
Hmm.
um,
Yeah.
which leads me to my next topic, which is reconciliation.
Hmm.
This is a big word in Canada for about the last 9 years,
Hmm.
kind of with the start of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And I'm wondering, what does that word mean to you? And what would you like our podcast listeners to know about that word? And how can musicians participate in that?
Well, I think that I guess the first, it is such a word that's been used so often. I always think that sort of reconciliation is a weird word to use it, for this type of issue. Is that reconciliation kind of means that there was actually a time when things went right, when there was
Yeah.
actually a sort of like a good relationship with the country, which is it never happened.
Mhm.
So I get it's a safe word. I think that has been brought up because the conversations that are still ongoing are important. And I've also said many times that reconciliation or the process of this is not it's not a destination. It's an ongoing journey. If we believe in the seven teachings, like about this will take 7 generations for us to really heal from these deep wounds that are still happening. So um, but I also know that many people, and I think that one of the people I respect the most right now that's still living is Justice Murray Sinclair.
Yes.
Um, I think that, I mean, obviously something like that, that's a real leader, with not the same, he's a leader in the Anishinaabe way, the two-legged creature, like the idea of like the sacred teachings. And it's
Yes.
not because he went to law school and got trained in Western law and stuff like that that makes him such an outstanding person. He's his elders and his community and his ancestors stand behind him, and I've never heard somebody uh, so in terms of like speaking the truth, not being angry when you ever hear him like on radio or being interviewed. Here's somebody that actually just speaks the truth. I actually got to work with him a couple of years ago. He was narrating a symphonic work that we were singing with the Winnipeg Symphony. So it was so fun to meet him and
Wow.
talk with him. But I think that somebody like that behind this commission made a lot of people believe sort of that this was possible to be able to have some dialogue at least. Um, and the amount of effort that but could you imagine being in that commission, traveling across the country and listening to testimony every day like that?
No.
That would have just been, but yet the people that they picked, that were they were strong people, and they had the medicines, and they did have the elders, and protection from a lot of that, but that's still, they're human, so they reconciliation, I think, in the dialogue that a lot of things are happening where there's a lot more books and by Indigenous people, by their, whether it's like um, Richard Wagamus, the late Richard Wagamus, there's just some
Yes.
incredible writing, but it's heartbreaking, some of his stuff. But that we're having more Indigenous authors and voices out there that we can need to listen to. We need to listen. Reconciliation by non-Indigenous people is listening,
Mm.
and that happens in the arts world too. It's sort of like for two collaborative spirits, true collaborative projects, which are happening more and often. Is there needs to be a lot more listening, and get rid of our preconceptions of what is an Indigenous, what is Indigenous music? It's a powwow. Is it one of wooden flutes, or is it hoop dancing, and is it beads and feathers, or is an Indigenous person sort of like that somebody can write a symphony or choreograph a ballet or write a novel about a Russian czar, like it's all these things are just sort of, if we're always pigeonholed into certain aspects,
Mhm.
and I understand why that's in some ways, but I think that the conversations, even the fact that you asked that question, um, open for a dialogue, in terms of like, I don't have no answers, and I don't know anybody that really does, but I think listening is a very important aspect of uh, of sort of how we're going to repair these huge wounds, and not really relying on a certain, like in terms of government committees, or a politician has a 10-second soundbite about how they're going to get water to these nations. No,
And
I want to see.
they
No,
haven't yet. They
no.
get these sound bites and it just doesn't happen. And um, you mentioned one of my favorite authors, and if you'll permit me one moment, because
Yes.
um, right beside me in my armchair is this.
Oh yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah,
Did you finish
yeah.
this? Did you finish this one?
No, not yet. My partner has. She's got all the books, and so I haven't finished it yet. But
So, for everybody that's going to listen to this on audio, I'm holding up a copy of Richard Wagamese' Starlight. It's the last book he wrote, and he passed away while writing it. And if I say any more, I'll give it away. um, but I think that yeah, that book really taught me a lot as well.
mhm,
So highly recommend. Um,
yeah,
Thank you for sharing your thoughts on reconciliation.
mhm,
And part of what we're doing for that is before our concerts, before our online events, we have a territorial acknowledgement. And it's
yeah,
kind of to reflect on the colonial history of this country. Like you said, reconciliation means that, oh, before we were chums.
yeah.
And it's just not the case. So I'm wondering though, some of these acknowledgements or statements on grant applications
Hmm.
that we have to, we have to write these certain statements down. Um, you know, some people and I even feel this sometimes that I've gotten it down to a formula, and I'm wondering if you can comment on, do some of those things start to lack authenticity after a while? It just seems this is what we do at school before an assembly, this is what we do before a concert, and it's
Hmm.
wondering your thoughts on that.
Well, I'm sure that I know that like for a while, I'm sure a lot of people have been, why do we do this all the time? And also, I feel a little bit too is like I'm treaties are a colonial word, and have also been kind of like all been broken. So I think what actually is and it's a complicated, very complicated. And again, I don't have the answers, or I'm not sure which way I feel. Like I love land acknowledgements. I love the idea of saying like we are standing in the land of the Dene and the Cree and the Oji Cree and Ojibwe and Inuit Métis. Like I really feel that's acknowledging the land, because if we're not Indigenous, I'm actually a visitor on this land. My blood doesn't come from here, so I'm still a visitor here, and I'd like to acknowledge the land, the peoples of the Mississauga,
Mhm.
Ojibwe, and I try to acknowledge that. But the idea of like, I guess even if it's a ballet or an orchestra concert or whatever, and it's nothing to do with Indigenous, there's nothing. I think it's still good that people are acknowledging that we are on this land. I've actually kind of in Winnipeg, and this is the only hockey team that does this. They before hockey games they acknowledge they're on Treaty One territory, and
Really?
that says something about sort of, I guess, Winnipeg or what have you. But no other sports team, as far as I know, does that.
Hmm.
So again, that's kind of another small move, I guess. Like it's little baby steps, but other people might give you a totally different answer. Like, no, we need to acknowledge the treaties. We need to actually, we need to acknowledge the land and what, this is Treaty One or Treaty Three or whatever. That's good too. I
I
think
think
it's just good to acknowledge. Um, it's good to sort of acknowledge that aspect. That's another good step towards reconciliation, as far as I'm concerned.
I think so too. We're all occupying a certain space. Um, and I think during this pandemic, we've all had a lot more time at home. There's no concerts to go to on Fridays, Saturdays, or Sunday
No.
afternoons. Um, and you can watch a live stream for 2.5 weeks till they take it offline.
Yeah.
We keep them online for a year in case our audience is wondering.
Awesome.
So I'm wondering, sort of, some thoughts that have come to me through webinars and reflecting with some of my teaching colleagues is and this is especially true of music, we are teaching it in a super colonial way that maintains a colonial status of tonic and dominant pitch relationship.
Hmm.
um, Tonalities, modes that are specific to Western Europe. And
Yeah.
I'm wondering, this starts very young with a Kodai student going so me, and
Hmm.
learning there's a relationship between do and so, and ti to do. It starts so young, and I'm wondering if you could comment on how to decolonize music education.
Oh, that's a big discussion in the last little while that I noticed have been going to many panels and many discussions of that. I think even personally, even just using decolonization again, that's a colonial word. I
Mm,
understand the reason. I like the word transformation, actually. I think that the idea of sort of transforming, and we were always transforming in terms of like our development of music and, speaking from a Western idea, like, like a Western musical history, we've always moved on. We had, Haydn moved on to, Haydn moved on to Mozart, Mozart moved on to Beethoven, and Schumann. It's like, there's always the kind of like, taking things and it's a development, I guess, in some ways. And I think in some ways, like I just had a talk yesterday with a bunch of students from Wilfrid Laurier University, and they were talking about these young, undergrads, and they were just like they identified too, is it the way that music history and music, composition and analysis is taught. It's
mhm.
very, very dry, and it's very, very egocentric, in terms of like, Western centric is the idea of that this is, the highest end of music making, which actually is ridiculous because most of the world doesn't speak that language. And
Nope.
most of the world's population doesn't know who Beethoven is, or, Bach, or any of those names would mean nothing to them.
Hmm.
Um, so we're kind of we've definitely nailed our idea of like a musical language, and that's where I think so-called classical music has gone off the rails in terms of like how we go. Every orchestra director or board says, how can we make our music more accessible? How can we well, it's the approach that you sell classical music. Can you afford $150, wear a tuxedo, pay $10 for a glass of wine in intermission, pay for parking? That's sort of what the rest of the population thinks of it. Um, and then there's, like no clapping between, movements. Like in terms of like if there's always the maestro coming on stage, and it's like it's this really, I think, that archaic ritual that is happening in the symphonic, particularly the symphonic world.
Yes.
We see the bad ones fall, and a lot of them are, in terms of like the abuse and the abuse of power and the other forms of abuse, male dominated, what have you, maestros. We've seen that, in the past. We have a little bit more diversity, but I don't think it's sustainable, um, because that's the way that, the so-called gatekeepers of classical music,
Hmm.
like that, like it's sacred to them. So they're, but in another 20 years, those halls are going to be permanently empty, like because they're empty now because of the pandemic. But like, are people going to be going to Grand Opera in 25 years? Like, are they going to, are people going to be going to hear Verdi and, or hear Tosca and what have you? So I think that there's a lot of, and it's the institutions that I think that are need to work on a lot of sort of making it the more accessible, more diverse.
Hmm.
And yeah, it's a lot. I mean, that's a whole subject we could talk about for hours as well too. But
This sounds like the type of strategic planning that a lot of artistic boards need to dig into, because what's happening is, I'm sharing privately to some of my friends some of our concerts. I hope our board members don't mind if they hear this. I'm sharing some of our concerts which are paid and have a paywall on YouTube, but I'm sharing to select three people usually, to say, you know what, we're doing some pretty cool things. Here's some pretty cool musicians with some great music. If you're relaxing and you're reading a book, like, make yourself a cup of tea. This music might go great with it. Trying to gently introduce them with shorter, first of all, I think the answer is shorter concerts.
yep, definitely.
And like, maybe they're not all at 8 downtown when parking is still expensive.
Hmm.
And maybe, um like, I don't know how we're going to work on the dress code issue in classical music, because
Mm,
shockingly, or not shockingly, whenever I invite my friends to in-person concerts, and these are people who are not musicians, and I tell them, "Oh, Beethoven is going to be there.
yeah.
Beethoven's going to be there," and they say, "Oh, I don't have time to get ready." I'm like,
Mm,
"What do you mean get ready?" They're like, "Oh, but what do I have to wear to go to the Vancouver Opera?"
yeah.
And I'm like, "Well, it's Vancouver, so if you wear Lululemon, it's probably going to be okay."
Yeah.
I've had to really work with them on, like, we're going to have a beer and wings before and then walk
Yeah.
across to the Orpheum. And if you come in, like, if you are coming from a yoga or Pilates class and you're just wearing like a clean shirt and clean leggings, big deal. And if you want to
Yeah.
dress up, you can. But there's bigger things at issue as well, with like who's on the program.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know,
Bunch of dead white guys.
so many dead white guys, and it's like you
Yeah.
said, it's not that we don't want to talk about Beethoven string quartets
Yeah. No.
or the William Byrd five-part mass, which I'm sure you love.
Oh, I do sung it many times, but actually, you just opened up a little bit of a gateway there because I kind of like also feel that I personally love the string quartets and the bird tribe, and and Mahler, and I want to hear that live.
Me
And
too.
I have so many friends within the orchestral world, and I used to major. I was a trumpet major, so
Hmm.
brass music, and that, especially that Germanic, say Richard Strauss and what have you. I love that stuff. So don't get me wrong, because I still want to see that captivated. Um, but what one thing that actually does inspire like me, if you ever go online and watch Gustav Dudamel conduct the Systema Choir, I mean, sorry, the Systema Orchestra. When they do these, it brings life into it. It's like, oh my God, this is like the best orchestral I've ever heard. Like, because it's all these young people experiencing it through the wonderful, guidance of Gustav Sturmel,
Yes.
and the joy you can hear actually why this is incredible music.
Yeah.
And I think that I even sometimes if I'm really busy writing and I want to take a break, or I just want to spend an evening just listening to music, thankfully with YouTube or what have you, or recordings, I can just find what I want to listen to. And it's like, I want to listen to Mahler six today, or I want to listen to this string quartet or whatever. I mean, it's just, there's so much to choose from. I know because I'm already a believer. I've already, I was listening to this stuff for a long time, and I'm still discovering it because you can't know everything about music.
Yes.
I just think in general, the way it's like sort of marketed or what have you, that it, or just to sort of, again, the gatekeepers of classical music just really need to kind of like really rethink about, for their own sake. And I want to see orchestras survive. And I
Mm.
want my friends to be employed. Um, but it's kind of vital right now, I think.
It's, I think the pandemic has demonstrated where we have urgent needs.
Hmm.
And when I see that the Met is putting on these 25 US dollar a pop performances of one super
Hmm.
singer and one pianist,
Yeah.
but their orchestra is not being paid right now.
Well, honestly, I went down the rabbit hole just the other day on Facebook, which sometimes I do, and just I'm not going to name names, of course, or whatever, but I just feel that the that's the worst. That's probably the worst case scenario of a conductor getting severance and the orchestra
Yes.
being off like no income for a whole year. And this is one of the best orchestras, not the world, certainly in the States. That's orchestra smoking good. But like
Smoking
the
good.
fact that but I mean, I cannot now even think of supporting the Met and the president or the CEO, however much he makes. And again, I won't name names, but it's just like it's ridiculous that you're not paying probably the jewel in the crown of the Met crown. It's not the
Yes.
famous opera singers or
No.
the famous, it's the orchestra and the chorus.
Yep.
That those are the ones those are not only your frontline soldiers, but I like the jewel. So yeah, I think that's probably one of the worst case scenarios, because I think a lot of orchestras are really trying to find ways to make it work for their musicians,
It is.
even with smaller numbers. But not to but for that organization, the Met for not that's actually a criminal behavior, I think, and just crazy.
It is, and I definitely agree with you that I remember when I first heard the Met online, or they were at Cineplex. They would every
Yeah,
Saturday they would have the Met at Cineplex, and the first time I ever went was with my friend Kripa, and we saw um, Yevgeny Onegin with
yeah,
Vorostovsky
yeah,
and Renee Fleming. Oh, that was so beautiful! It was
yeah,
just amazing. But what blew me away, and those two are amazing singers, but what blew me away was the chorus
yeah,
and the orchestra. So I absolutely agree.
yeah.
We're going to close our interview with one final question because you mentioned that when you were writing some difficult music, that you
Mm.
had smudging and medicines to protect you.
Hmm.
Very, very important. And I want to leave this on such a positive, reflective note. So my question is, how do the land, the sea, and the mountains and rivers where you live or places you've been, how does that influence your music?
Oh, it always does. Like I've been lucky enough to write a couple land-based pieces. I wrote a piece about Lake Winnipeg many years back. Lake Winnipeg in Cree is Mr. Hesegegen. It means a great ocean, great water.
Wow.
So but I'm prairie boy, but I think actually what I love the most are the mountains. That's why I love going to the Banff Center. So, because so much, because there's a spirit, there's an electricity, there's a magnetic force of the mountains that I've always been attracted to since I was a child.
Hmm.
Um, love the West Coast, of course. My mom was originally from Courtenay, BC. So I haven't been out for a couple of years, so I really miss it. But I do have work out there for the next a little while. So this particularly next year. I actually hope to be able to work with the Vancouver Chamber Choir next year, so that's really exciting. So
Great.
there's a lot of things coming up, but in terms of land based, pretty much like I love just being on the land. I love being, whether it's a forest or the prairies, the mountains or the ocean. One of my to-do lists actually, particularly maybe hopefully in a year, is to go explore the East Coast a lot more. I've only been to Newfoundland once just for a conference, and even then I was in St. John's all the time. But I felt the energy. I want to see the East Coast. But also one of my special places I've been is up in Iqaluit. Just to be up there is a totally different world, but it's incredible, the Arctic. So I
Yeah.
really want to I think every Canadian should get up there, but it's so expensive, but it's really worth seeing. It's beautiful up there.
It's one of my goals, actually.
Yeah.
One of my travel goals, and I need to reach that goal because I do know that it's a very special place that the Creator has made with some special beauty that is unique only to itself.
I totally agree. And I think that, and the people on that land are pretty special. I think I'm an honorary. I've been called an honorary Inuk. Um, but I have many friends that are from up there and live up there or have lived up there or want, like they'll always be part of it. But it's a very important, it's a very special part of Turtle Island. I feel like it's just very special and very incredible.
Yes, it certainly is. Andrew, I want to thank you for your time today. I really appreciate your thoughts, and I think what has been the most encouraging to me is your optimism and your hope.
Mm.
And I hear it in your music. I hear the truth that the Kookums were telling in Winnipeg.
Mm-hmm.
I hear the truth that Justice Marie Sinclair has been speaking to our country, but I also hear resilience and I do hear hope. And I really appreciate that. And our audience is lucky to have heard this conversation today. And I thank you so much for joining us.
Chi Jennifer, thank you. My honor.
Thanks, Andrew. And if you come to Coast Salish territory, please let us know.
I will definitely.
Thank you.
Awesome.